All right, we are at the top of the hour. We're going to have a lot of people joining in here in the next couple of minutes, but we're going to go ahead and get started. For those of you who've never attended one of these, this is a Corvair Society of America course and meetup. This is a special event that we hold every third Thursday of the month for Corsa members. And welcome. I want to share again that this call is muted. You won't be able to unmute yourself. We have lots of material to get through, and we can use the chat feature for any questions that you might have. And just so you know, several people sent in questions ahead of time, and our guest speaker is going to talk about those. I do want to introduce Ken Tyger from Penn Grade 1, and he's going to talk about a subject that is like black gold, Texas tea hair oil, which is always an extremely popular topic on the Facebook pages. And I'm going to tell you right now, he's got lots to share, and we might have to bring him back for part 2. So I'm going to turn it over right now to Ken so we can get started, and take it away, Ken.
Thank you very much, Jeanette, for having me, and many thanks to all the club members for allowing me into your homes this evening. As Jeanette has alluded, there's so much information here. I've never done this presentation in less than an hour and a half, let alone 45 minutes, allowing some question and answer period. So bear with me. I'll do the best I can. And if we have to come back for round 2, I'm more than willing to do that. But let me begin by, again, just introducing myself. I'm Ken Tyger. I'm with Penn Grade 1, DA Lubricants. And I've worked, one of the perks of my job is to work with in or around classic cars and to spend time with great people like yourselves. Let's be honest, this is not a hobby. This is, in fact, a passion. And all of us at Penn Grade 1 High Performance Oil certainly understand the passion. One area that is so critical with that passion is engine lubricants. And I hope that by the end of my discussion this evening, you find it interesting and you certainly find it informative. So really, to begin, let's get started. I always like to start with a bit of a history lesson. And a lot of people don't realize that the Penn Grade 1 High Performance Oil of today is from that same lineage, that pedigree, that heritage of the original Kendall GT1 High Performance Oil that was made famous by individuals like Big Daddy Don Garlitz and Hall of Famer Bruce Larson. And for many years, it was known under the Brad Penn name. A little bit more on that history. Really, it was sailing along quite nicely until the Kendall company in Bradford, Pennsylvania decided to leave Bradford and join the ConocoPhillips family. So what they left behind was this refinery that only processes Pennsylvania grade crude. One of the unique characteristics of the original green oil, or Penn Grade 1, is that unique Pennsylvania grade base cut. And we're going to get into more of that in just a few slides. But as you can see in the timeline there, there was quite a bit of activity in a very short time frame. But at the end of the day, the bottom line, in 2001, with Kendall gone, the company that took over the refinery, American Refining Group, decided really to start their own blended lubes division. So without the Kendall name, they had to come up with their own. And that was, of course, Brad Penn, short for Bradford, Pennsylvania. So for many years, the original green oil flew under the Brad Penn banner. And in 2015, the brand was acquired by the DA Lubricant Company out of Lebanon, Indiana, who decided to change the Brad Penn name to simply Penn Grade 1. Now, what's unique about the 50 plus years of this product's existence? Yes, the name has changed. Yes, the bottle design has changed, but what's inside that bottle has not. You're still afforded that great Pennsylvania grade base cut. And I'll get into more detail why that's so appealing to a classic vintage legacy historic car owner, especially a 60s era Corvair. So Pennsylvania grade crude, what's very unique about it is it's free of natural contaminants. And you're talking about free of asphaltic constituents, trace amounts of nitrogen and sulfur. But what's really appealing to an end user is some of the more critical performance characteristics. One is a naturally high viscosity index. Now, the higher the viscosity index, the less the viscosity change over a given temperature range. Now, that is a very desirable characteristic of any lubricant. You're talking about a natural metal wetting characteristic that a unique cut affords. It's almost like a natural affinity to the metal surfaces, a natural metal wetting characteristic that is literally unparalleled. And Penn Grade 1 is the only oil in the entire classic market that will afford you all those unique characteristics. And again, it's all contributed to the Pennsylvania grade base cut. Just to move on, as you can see on the screen, that unique Pennsylvania grade or Pennsylvania grade crude can only be extracted from the Appalachian Basin, and that would encompass, Western New York, obviously Pennsylvania, Eastern Ohio, Virginia, Northern West Virginia, etc. What's very unique about the Pennsylvania grade base cut is it's really due to the consistency of this base oil. You can literally trace the quality of the product from the wellhead to the packaged good. Okay, so again, this is very unique to Pennsylvania. And as an end user of a classic car, you can certainly afford the characteristics of that unique Pennsylvania grade base cut in the finished form, that being Penn Grade 1. So again, as you can see on the screen, these were many of the companies back in the day that actually processed and blended with Pennsylvania grade crude. Everybody recognizes the old Kendall can, some of the old school guys, the two fingers, which indicated the first 2,000 mile oil, where again, you had Pennzoil, Quaker State, Wolfshead. Some of these companies aren't even in existence anymore or have been, acquired, if you will, and are part of another larger company. So again, when it comes to Penn Grade 1 and that unique base oil cut, it's really what made the original Kendall GT1 oil what it was back in 1968 when it was first introduced, clear up to 2021, that unique cut is still in there. So there were so many questions regarding additives, and I really wanted to spend the next couple of slides to really kind of explain, not getting into the technical so much as more the 10, 20,000 foot view, because we just don't have the time, but what additive basics, what additives actually do. An additive is essentially a material that is added to a base oil to change the physical properties and the performance characteristics. And it's not until an additive is introduced to a base oil that the resultant product is a lubricant. So keep that in mind. When you're dealing with uninhibited, unadditized base oils, they are exactly that. It's only when you add an additive, or additives plural, that it becomes a lubricant. But again, you have physical properties, and additives are used to change or alter the performance characteristics. Now, in relationship to Penn Grade 1 or your high performance classic car oil, you have chemically inert additives that are used to act to improve the physical properties of a lubricant. And you can see there on the list, I've just detailed some that are technically considered chemically inert. And then you have chemically active, which interact chemically to the metal surfaces, creating sacrificial film, if you will. Some of the more common chemically active additives would certainly be zinc and phosphorus. And those are two words that any classic car owner that has to protect their flat tappet cam has certainly heard and done their heard enough of and done their research on. This is really a slide that depicts a completely blended formulated lubricant. And as you can see, you have multiple additives at play. And this is where your formulation chemists earn their big bucks, because you take multiple additives that must work in a synergistic fashion. Okay, and we're going to get into the introduction of aftermarket additives and why they can be so detrimental to the performance. I believe that was one of the questions we had earlier this week that I wanted to go over. But again, this is just essentially how additives work. You have your chemically inert and you have your chemically active, which again, note you have a lot of those different additives aggressively fighting for the surface. But again, knowing this, they must work in a synergistic fashion. So just real quick, I wanted to get into what you see in the beaker. What is actually depicted is the various additives, but more importantly, in a blended lubricant, you can see there on the left where you have the majority of the formulation is base oil, where anywhere from 15 to 25%, and in many of the modern licensed oils of today, I've seen as high as 35% additive. So again, the type of base oil and the additives are very critical to the resultant product. And obviously the treat rate, all those additives in that beaker, you would see less and less depending on the type of system that you're designing the lubricant for. One such example would be transmission fluid. Another example would be differential. Okay, but obviously engine oils, clearly have a great deal of additives. You're dealing with the byproduct of internal combustion. Okay. So continuing on, again, just to piggyback what I just shared, motor oils are the biggest application for lubricant additives, really accounting for the most volume used. Think about the reason why. Internal combustion engines produce and generate a large amount of contamination. Every time you fire up that engine, you're producing more and more byproduct of internal combustion. Sulfuric acid, nitric acid, soot, varnish, moisture. Most automotive applications are certainly mobile and come into contact with a wide range of contaminants. A great example of that is driving down a dusty road. Even though engines, transmissions, differentials are technically sealed, okay, they still have the tendency to ingress ambient dust, ambient moisture, all right? And then automotive applications experience a wide range of operating temperatures, okay? Not everybody drives in what we consider the best ambient temperature environment, between 60 and 100 degrees. There are many of you, and myself included, that often have to drive our vehicles well below 60 degrees Fahrenheit, and for some of you, well above 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Both instances would require what's known as a multi-grade oil, okay? And we're going to talk about more on that later. But in a nutshell, engine oils fail for three main reasons: contamination, oil degradation, which affects its life or viability, and additive depletion. Now, you can have companies blend together oils that would last for several thousand miles, okay, even longer than what you would typically see and what is being recommended with modern full synthetic lubricants. But as an end user, okay, we would all be spending a great amount of money for these types of lubricants. So again, we'll get into drain interval in just a little bit, but those types of oils can be made, but it would be at great expense. If you also look at the picture of the beaker to the left, you see an oil that's very heavily oxidized versus one that is what I would consider new, or virgin. If your engine oil looks like the beaker on the left, okay, in my opinion, you have extended your drain and really overextended your drain, and really a more frequent, carefully selected interval should be considered. And quite frankly, for a 60s era Corvair, you should always adhere to a more frequent, carefully selected interval. So I'm not well versed on the actual gas tank and you know, in the 60s era Corvair and how much fuel it actually holds, and I apologize for that. So let's just say on average, okay, for every 5 or 6 fill-ups in your Corvair, just through normal operation, between the first and the 5th and 6th fill-up, you are producing 90 to 120 gallons of water. Again, these are the byproducts of internal combustion. 3 to 10 gallons of unburnt fuel, 1/2 to 2 pounds of soot and varnish, 1/4 to a pound of varnish, excuse me, and the prior one was soot and carbon, 1 pound to 4 pounds of sulfuric and nitric acid. And again, this is why you need to change your oil, okay? Now, take into account the reasons, the very functions, if you will, of an engine oil: to keep components cool, to keep them clean, to keep them lubricated, and to keep them protected. All have to work in order for you to provide the proper lubrication for your classic vintage legacy Corvair engine. Now, we would certainly agree, okay, that applications have changed. And what I have on the screen is 100 years worth of automotive and aviative history. Now, jump to the left and take for instance, the Model T, okay, which produced, 20 horsepower. And that, if you think about it, to put that into some perspective, that's the same horsepower equivalency of many of today's riding lawnmowers. Jump to the which by the way, the only engine oil available for the 1908 Model T was literally an uninhibited, unadditized base oil, right around the viscosity equivalent of an SA30 or an ISO VG 100. But there was literally no additives. It was nothing more than base oil. Fast forward to the 1940s when they started to introduce zinc or an anti-wear additive to the oils to provide that little bit of anti-wear. And even in the early 1950s, when they started to introduce multi-grade oils, which allowed you an oil that had and behaved at a certain viscosity at initial startup, but became more heavier or more viscous under operating temperature. And that was all due to the chemistry, okay? It was basically, many individuals were running straight weight, monograde, or linear viscosity, which meant it was a 30 weight at startup, 30 weight at operating temp. So in early 1950s was really the advent of multi-grades. To today's supercars, you're talking about very tight clearance engines, very light viscosities, high revving, high horsepower, 1,000+ horsepower, and these cars are actually street legal. Now you're talking about the Model T with 20 horsepower versus 1,000 horsepower. We've come a long way in 100 years. Jump down to the Wright brothers, who used a tallow-infused or fat-infused oil to grease the chain drives on their gliders. To the 1950s Piper Cubs that used nothing more than a straight 50-weight engine oil in their airplanes, to today's modern jetline industry. Now, that last one in particular, I want you to think about something for a minute. Now, you're flying in a pressurized cigar tube at 500 miles an hour at 35,000 feet, where the ambient temperature is minus 70 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, that's neither the time nor the place to have a lubricant-related failure. So again, you're talking about, the days of just because it's slippery or, as long as it's oil are literally long over. And there is a great deal that must be considered before selecting the type of lubricant. And I hope that by the end of my presentation, you'll have a better understanding of what is actually right for your application and really what you should avoid. So the bottom line is this: oil is the lifeblood of any application. And there really is no bigger maintenance item more important to extending an application's life, let alone reducing its repair costs. Engine oil is often considered the cheapest component of any application. But when you take a step back and look at the overall picture, you will find that it is absolutely the most critical. As a classic Corvair owner, you should always practice the 3 P's of maintenance. Be proactive, be predictive, be preventative, just for the overall longevity and better maintenance of your classic automobile. Excuse me one moment. So I'm often asked 2 questions. Now, when you've worked as long as I have with classic cars, and that's going on 22 years, I get asked the same questions. What about long-term storage? And what about viscosity selection? Okay, now let's take viscosity selection. I generally base viscosity selection on 3 criteria: main and rod bearing clearance, the anticipated ambient temperature operation, and whatever the OEM, the original equipment manufacturer, and or the engine builder recommend. Now, just to jump back to ambient temperature, I'm just going to assume that the majority of you utilize your Corvairs, and again, that very narrow ambient temperature window, but the most optimal ambient temperature to run your car in, between 60 and 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, I can tell you that Chevrolet, as an OEM, was very consistent in their ambient temperature viscosity recommendations. So in the 1960s era, when it came to Corvair and the engine oil viscosity, Chevrolet would often recommend, at any operating above 40 degrees Fahrenheit, an SAE 30 or straight weight 30, okay? Now, because multi-grades were certainly available, and because many had the propensity, if you will, to run their vehicles well below 60 degrees Fahrenheit, Chevrolet would often recommend a 1030, a 10W40, a 15W40, and a 20W50 respectively. So I hope with those viscosities mentioned that I at least touched on some of the viscosities that you may be running in your vehicle. Now, in relationship to long-term storage, and I really want to get into the drain interval, if you will, and what I feel is the optimal drain interval for your classic car, okay? When I get asked, I often give the answer every 3,000 miles or once a year, whichever comes first. And that's when I get, well, you know, Ken, I change my oil religiously every 3,000 miles in my classic car. But when I push them on the subject, they eventually fess up and say, well, you know, it might take me 3 or 4 years to get to 3,000 miles. So all that suggests to me is that every winter, they're storing the car with more and more of that used byproduct or used oil, that byproduct of internal combustion, that very harmful byproduct that's just going to be left sitting in their engine for weeks to months at a time, basically idle, or what we call static. Thank you. And so we're looking at that. And what I do is, knowing that many of you only drive your Corvairs maybe 500 miles, maybe 1,000 miles, maybe 1,500 miles throughout the summer before you put it away in the wintertime. And many people get into the habit of driving their vehicles all summer, putting the car away under storage conditions. And then when they pull it back out in the spring, when the ambient temperature is more conducive to driving on a continuous basis, they say, oh, I better change my oil, when they've literally left used oil sitting in the crankcase throughout the winter months. My advice is to change the oil and filter prior to any anticipated lengthy storage period, where as the end user, the car is going to sit for literally weeks to months at a time of inactivity. And the reason for that is very simple. You never want to leave used oil sitting in the crankcase. I don't care if the oil has 500 miles, 1,000 miles, 1,500, or even 2,000 miles of service. Never leave used oil sitting in the crankcase. Now, next spring, when you're able to pull the car out and drive it, you've had fresh oil sitting in the block all winter. You're good to go. You don't have to change the oil again until the following fall, prior to that anticipated storage period. Okay? Now, again, we talked about multi-grades, but how many of you actually know what the W stands for in a 10W30 or 10W40 or 20W50? Okay? It is not weight, ladies and gentlemen. It has nothing to do with weight. The W actually stands for winter, and it identifies that oil as being best suited for cold ambient temperature startup conditions. Okay, so I have some pictures there, which is pretty common in what you would see in my hometown of Bradford, Pennsylvania, where it's literally Siberia for 4 months out of the year. That's a very common sight where I live. I hope and trust that for many of you, you don't have to deal with this like I do. Maybe you're able to drive your cars, your great Corvairs, for many months, maybe 8, 9, 10 months at a time. If that's the case, then maintain that once a year or 3,000 mile interval, whichever comes first. And if you're ever driving in this type of situation or starting the engine well below 60 degrees Fahrenheit, that's when you may want to consider running the 1030, 1040, or 2050 respectively. You have to remember that the bearing clearances in a 60s era engine were literally designed for the viscosity grades available in the 1960s. So that's why those 3 multi-grade oils are still recommended by Chevrolet today in most of their classic vintage legacy equipment, specifically their engines. So let's get into supplements. Now, I talked a great deal, I wish I had longer, about the actual additives that are being used. So at least at this juncture, that everything must work in a synergistic fashion. It's all about the perfect balance. So when you take an oil supplement, and one of the more popular oil additives, aftermarket additives or supplements today is zinc, okay? Because everybody has done their research and they know that the modern oils have all seen a drastic reduction in the amount of anti-wear chemistry. And that was all done to protect and extend the life of sensitive emission systems like O2 sensors and catalytic converters. Well, to a 60s era Corvair owner, they could care less about protecting the catalytic converter. You don't have one, okay? So again, those that have done their research know that the modern oils have seen that reduction in chemistry, so they run out and they buy an aftermarket zinc additive. Now, again, remember what I said. Engine oils are a precise balance of additives and base oils. So when you add an aftermarket additive, not only can you disrupt that perfect formulation balance, but now you've literally changed the identity of that oil. It's almost like using one more puzzle piece to a picture, a beautiful picture that's already put together. And I will often say that if you have to rely on an additive to change some aspect of your oil's performance, guess what? You're using the wrong oil. Everything you need is self-contained in that Penn Grade 1 quart bottle, and you're talking about an engine lubricant that was specifically designed and tailored for the protection of the flat tappet cam and all of the valve train componentry in those older legacy engines, the lifters, the wrist pins, the main and rod bearings, and yes, especially the cams, okay? So please, please don't use aftermarket additives. They are absolutely unnecessary. And that is with Penn Grade 1 or any other engine lubricant you choose. Do not use additives. And this is what you're protecting, ladies and gentlemen. This is your flat tappet cam. And here is a shot of your roller cam, not so much in the 60s era, but for many of you that have upgraded your engine or modified your engine, maybe you went to a roller follower rather than a flat tappet. You know, it's an interesting to note that in the needle bearings, in the rollers, they're starting to see a lot of premature wear because, again, they're running modern oils that were all designed with a different agenda in mind. And again, that was to protect and extend the life of catalytic converters. I left this slide in only to share with you that when it comes to high temp, high shear, okay, high temp, high shear is essentially the higher the high temp, high shear rate of an engine oil, the better the oil does at protecting bearings under highly stressed, highly loaded conditions. And remember some of those unique characteristics of the Pennsylvania grade base cut that's used in all the Penn Grade 1 formulations, that tenacious clingability, that natural metal wetting characteristic, that affinity, if you will, to metal surfaces, all leads to that high temp, high shear rate. Penn Grade 1 oils have some of the highest high temp, high shear rates in the industry, which means simply unparalleled protection. And that's really Penn Grade 1's claim to fame, is its protection value. And again, this really kind of spells it out why this product has been available for 50 plus years. It's been around since the late 60s when it rolled out as the original Kendall GT1 high performance oil. Some of the applications that you would typically expect to see Penn Grade 1 in, there you have it. Classic, vintage, legacy, historic, muscle car, street rod, high performance oils, just to name a few. Let's talk about the air-cooled engines. Now, air-cooled engines, as you know, create an extraordinary demand upon the engine oil. Air-cooled engines, as you know, lack a radiator and must rely on the ambient air to cool the engine. Now, that's a very tough task given when most of you drive your Corvairs, you know, in the spring, summer months, a lot of stop and go, a lot of idling that you're doing. Everybody's out driving, not to mention the very high ambient temperature. Now, what happens is that the engines create hot spots that the longer the oil is exposed will certainly lend to a more pronounced varnish condition and more of an aggressive oxidative state. Now, using a conventional mineral-based product like Penn Grade 1 is certainly allowable as long as you adhere to a more carefully selected frequent interval. And as you know, and I can honestly attest to this, some of those air-cooled Corvair engines can exceed 350, 375. I've even seen 400 Fahrenheit. Okay, so again, you're talking about the combination of the tenacious clingability, the high temp, high shear, the thermal stability. Again, these are all performance characteristics of that Pennsylvania grade base cut that's been in this product for over half a century. Now let's talk about synthetics, because there was a question posed to me about, I've upgraded my engine, or I've modified my engine. I have turbo this and turbo that. This is really for those, to begin, this is really for those that have the 60s era stock Corvair engines, okay? A lot of times you read about synthetics. Just because it's the product is a synthetic oil doesn't necessarily mean that it's better than anything in the market, okay? My professional opinion is that if your vehicle was born and bred on conventional mineral base stock, like it was in the 1960s, that vehicle should only run conventional mineral base stock, okay? Penn Grade 1 high performance oil, the straight weight 30 is 100% conventional. All of our multi-grades contain a partial synthetic component. And when I mean partial, that's exactly what the name describes. There's literally less than 10% PAO or synthetic component, and that was only incorporated about 15 years ago to help with the high temperature stability side of things. But it was never done at the expense of the remaining Pennsylvania grade base stock, okay? So you look at some of the advantages of synthetic oils today. High temperature stability. Synthetics do a wonderful job with high temperatures. Low temperature fluidity or pumpability. Where I live, where it's Siberia 4 months out of the year, having a full synthetic is absolutely necessary. But what I found with synthetics is most people run synthetic oils for one reason, and that is the better volatility that they offer, which simply equates to the oils lasting longer, which promotes extended drain. Now, I can tell you, with all the Corvair clubs that I presented to, all the Corvair folks, and any classic car owner that I've come in contact with, I have yet to meet an end user that placed more of a value on extended drains over the ultimate protection of his or her engine. And they get better protection with conventional mineral-based oil that engine was born and bred on. Some disadvantages, obviously cost. You're talking about systems that have never seen a synthetic oil. The first synthetics were very tough on the seals in many of the classic engines, that first PAO chemistry, that polyalpha olefin, which would literally cause the seals to swell, crack, and then ultimately start leaking. Today's synthetic oils are much better. They've addressed that. That's not an issue. But my biggest knock against synthetic oils is that they simply lack the clingability of a good quality conventional mineral-based oil like Penn Grade 1. Why is that important? And maybe some of you are asking that. You've just changed the oil and filter in your car, okay? And you've left it sitting in your garage for several weeks to months for your winter storage. And I want you to know that because of that clingability, the oil never leaves the surface. So when you change the oil and filter, you take the car around the block for a few times, get it up to operating temp, then you get it back, shut it down, and leave it alone. When you pull that car out for the very first time in that spring and turn that key where almost 70% of engine wear occurs, just by simply doing this, with Penn Grade 1, you are always protected from what's known as that dry start scenario. Okay, that's what I mean about clingability. With modern, very light lubricating synthetic oils, when you shut down that motor, where do you think that oil is going without that clingability? Right down into the drain pan, okay? So I know there's more on synthetics. Again, we just don't have the time, and I apologize for that. We can get into more into the weeds if you really want to, if we have a part two. And this really is the difference between synthetic. You're still starting with the conventional base soil. You can see on the top there with a conventional mineral base soil, something that would have been available in the 1960s, where the molecules are not uniform size, okay? Whereas with synthetic oils, it's a further refining process where you turn up a little bit more heat, you add a little bit more pressure, and you literally crack those molecules to a more uniform size. And what that simply means is more planned, predictable results. You know, this is when I often interject that, you know, recently they polled individuals that lease cars for 2 years or less. You know, the number one reason given why people lease cars for 2 years or less? They never have to lift the hood, which means they don't do a lick of maintenance. So here's Mr. and Mrs. Smith coming in to buy or lease, excuse me, their brand new vehicle for 2 years. They drive it for 2 years without changing the oil. They bring it back. They hand over the keys. They get a new set of keys. Here you are, Mr. and Mrs. Smith. Here's your brand new car. We're going to put your older car on the lot. Best of luck to you. See you in 2 years. Now, can you imagine the condition of that oil? Even though you're using a synthetic oil, which is designed to last, provide better volatility, can you imagine the condition of that oil? I've seen oil like that come out of police cruisers, taxi cabs, municipality vehicles that often sit running idle, very tough on the engine and the oil, very short trips, but have full synthetic oils in them. I've seen full synthetic oils come out of these applications literally looking like a triple aught grease, okay? So it's just something to consider. Now, not to upset anybody, but I like to get up on my soapbox here regarding zinc and phosphorus chemistry, which I touched on just briefly a bit ago, and then ethanol fuel. And I don't know about any of you, but you're starting to see more and more of these ethanol free stations popping up, and I really want to at least shed some light on that topic for you and allow you to make up your mind. But in relationship to these catalytic converters, again, a 60s era Corvair owner could care less about protecting the catalytic converter. You don't have one. So why you would ever want to use a modern day lubricant is really beyond me. Harken back to the 60s and think about the oils and especially the viscosities that would have been available. Obviously, the oils back in the 60s had much higher levels of anti-wear than when compared to any of today's oil options. And again, you don't have the cat to worry about, but in 1975, when they mandated catalytic converters, essentially every vehicle manufactured since comes with a catalytic converter. So again, the reduction of anti-wear, and it's more so it's the phosphorus that can literally volatilize and poison the sensitive catalyst within the said catalytic converter. The platinum, the palladium, the rhodium, whatever's in there. It's the phosphorus that has that adverse effect. And in a ZDDP package, zinc dialkyl dithialphosphate, that's your anti-wear package. The phosphorus content is roughly 90% of the zinc content. So when the government said all you oil manufacturers were going to reduce the amount of phosphorus in your oil, down went the phosphorus, down went the zinc, and now you have the anti-wear levels that you have today. So again, don't have to worry about it in relationship to protecting the cat. You don't have one, but don't get into the trap of using modern day oils that were literally designed with a different agenda in mind. Now, this is what I meant about E85 or ethanol fuel. They were really developed to run in conjunction with the modern applications today. A lot of stainless steel componentry. The componentry in general was literally designed to run this modern fuel. Okay, E85 oils were essentially designed with rust protection and emulsion retention in mind. Phase separation was also critical. I'm sorry, I'm getting a little technical here, but phase separation was also critical because E85 fuel has a very nasty habit of collecting and holding moisture. Now, where we run into issues with that, especially if somebody's running an older engine oil like Penn Grade 1, is that, you know, without that proper maintenance, and they store the cars in the winter, they will literally come out in the springtime to change the oil, and they notice that they have a lot of gelling that has occurred. And again, that's just an adverse effect from running the E85 fuel on top of the used oil, the byproduct of internal combustion. Okay, so again, we're running out of time, but this is just a depiction of the phosphorus level, and you can see there how much it has literally dropped the phosphorus levels from the API SH, the service category, spark ignited SH category, which was at 1,200 parts per million. And it's already down. The very latest API service category SP is right around 800 parts per million of zinc versus Penn Grade 1, which has enhanced levels. It's even higher than 1,200 parts per million. It's actually at 1,500 parts per million of zinc.
Ken, before you leave the subject of E85, we did just get a question into the chat. Does 10% ethanol gas present the same problems as E85?
No, that's a great question. Okay, it's really the higher concentration of ethanol really seems to be the culprit. As you know, today at the pump, it's 10%, it's 15% ethanol. It is what it is. But if you notice, let me see if I can go back. If you notice, I have there in yellow for the members, there's a website, puregas.org. And what that will do is if you visit that, that will allow you to see all the ethanol-free fueling stations within your area. Or if you travel out of area with your Corvair, you can use that puregas.org to see all the ethanol-free fueling stations. If I owned a 60s era Corvair stock engine, I would not run E80. I certainly wouldn't run E85, and I would try to avoid E85 altogether. But to answer your question, the 10%, 15%, I have certainly not read or any research done to suggest to me that it's an issue. Okay. So I wanted to show the API service symbol, which really is the standard worldwide way to determine the viscosity of a gasoline or diesel engine. If you were to walk into a Walmart or any other box store and pull a quart of oil off the shelf, more often than not, those are fully licensed oils, meaning the very latest API service category or commercial category. There's a lot of information that's being relayed there. The service category, the viscosity, cold temperature vis, the high temperature viscosity, and of course the ILSAT category. You will not find a donut or API service symbol on the back of a Penn Grade 1 quart bottle for one reason. We simply did not want to be guidelined by the amount of anti-wear we incorporated in the Penn Grade 1 high performance oils. So they are essentially unlicensed oils. Now that is very appealing to a classic car owner, especially one that has pre-1975 hardware. Okay. Just a few more slides, Jeanette. A lot of times you hear about individuals that have done their research. Go ahead.
I was going to say you're good on time, so keep going.
Okay. A lot of times diesel oil is utilized in a Corvair engine because, again, more and more people are doing their research. They know there's been a reduction in anti-wear chemistry in passenger car motor oils, but you haven't technically seen that much of a drop in anti-wear in heavy-duty diesel. And that really is the only reason. They're not using diesel oil because it's diesel oil. They're using it because they know it still affords them the levels of anti-wear that is adequately protecting their flat tappet cam. Yes, they share the same anatomy, the same makeup, but in relationship to diesel versus gasoline engine oils, diesel oils certainly contain more additives per volume. They were designed with a different agenda. One such additive is calcium. Diesel engines have to deal with the byproduct of soot. So you have the chemistry that's really implemented, if you will, to help combat the byproducts of the compression ignited or commercial grade engine. And of course, gas and diesel engines have different lubrication requirements. Would a diesel engine oil work in your Corvair? Yes. And quite frankly, I would rather you consider using a diesel engine oil over any modern PCMO in the market today, just from the simple fact that you're getting more anti-wear. But is it necessarily the right oil for your classic engine? And the answer is no. I still think you should run a passenger car motor oil, one designed and tailored specifically for that purpose. So these are the Penn Grade 1 high performance oils that are readily available today. We're going to talk about braking oil in just a second, because there was a great question even tonight that Jeanette had forwarded me. But you can see, we have a limited number of viscosities, but again, these are the viscosities that are commonly used and what you would typically expect to find in the service manual or owner's manual of the older, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s era vehicles. To get into the gear oils, and we'll get back to the braking oil in just a second, but as a classic car lubricant provider, we certainly have our share of gear lubricants that are designed specifically for those systems, let's say, that contain yellow metallurgy. Now, to my knowledge, most Corvairs require an 8090 GL5 conventional mineral gear oil, okay? Now, the difference between a GL4 and a GL5, because you've probably seen reference to both. A GL4 is essentially, you're talking about a sulfur, phosphorus, or EP chemistry, all done to protect the gears, okay? But you have different levels. So a GL4 is essentially a half treat rate of a GL5 chemistry laden product, which means a GL4 would be safe to use in any transmission or differential that has soft yellow metal like brass, bronze, or copper, okay? A GL5 is designed for the hypoid gear protection. And if you have a GL5 system, you should use a GL5 lubricant, which is what we have. Do not use a GL4 or vice versa, okay? One's not going to be enough. One's chemistry is too much and too aggressive. So we also carry a limited slip GL5 8090. I don't believe that that's the case with Corvair, but it's simply worth mentioning. And you can see there, again, I just wanted to highlight Chevrolet, probably from 1950 to the mid 80s, what they would typically recommend in their applications. And really, in the spirit of discussion here, what you would typically find in your service manual for your Corvairs, okay? I was once asked, what would I run if I owned a Corvair? I'm very old school mentality minded. I like to run the heaviest, most viscous oil I can, as long as the bearing clearance and ambient temperature support it. Now, if you are consistently operating between 60 and 100 degrees Fahrenheit, then there's really no reason to select a multi-grade oil. That's when you want the benefit of the added film strength and shear stability that a monograde straight weight or linear viscosity provides. Whereas with the multi-grades, if you're one that has the tendency to drive your vehicle clear up until the snow starts to fly, let's say a late fall or early spring day when the ambient temperature is well below 60 degrees Fahrenheit, that's when I would say you may want to consider a multi-grade and consider using it year-round. Okay. Now back to braking oil. The question revolved around steel cast iron rings and the use of non-detergent. If you are in fact breaking in an engine and you have to successfully seat steel cast iron rings, the only type of oil that I would recommend is in fact a non-detergent oil, and that would be a non-detergent 30 weight. Now, the reason for that is very simple. Without any detergency, remember, one of the byproducts of internal combustion is varnish. So without the detergency, you had a lot of varnish that would literally build up during the run process. And it was actually that varnish that would help facilitate ring seating. Now, today's more flexible chromoly rings, not only is it good to run a product that has detergency, but also one that has controlled levels of anti-wear, not high levels, but controlled levels. The reason for that is very simple. Any good quality engine builder worth their salt will tell you that they expect some wear to occur during that initial run-in phase. And it's actually that supportive wear that can help facilitate ring seating. Again, this is a topic I could spend 2 hours on, and I apologize, please, I apologize that I'm giving you this 30,000 foot view. There's so much to talk about there, but I hope I've answered that question. And if not, Jeanette will certainly provide you with my email address and contact information. And by the way, I encourage any of you to reach out to me at any time. I'm just a phone call and an email away. Now, one thing, if there are some of you, I would assume, buy multiple cases of oil at a time, okay? And if for those of you that do, I'm often asked, what is the shelf life of a packaged good? Now, you can see there's some of the pictures that I have, which really kind of detail what I would consider an optimal storage condition. Now, what I typically say is, as long as the oil is stored in a cool, dry environment, elevated off the floor, away from any excess heat, light, or moisture, things that could cause the oil to oxidize quicker, a typical 3-year shelf life can be expected. Now, I've known packaged goods, like you see there in the picture, quart bottles, to last or be viable up to 10 years. But I certainly wouldn't recommend or endorse its use because, again, it's 10 years old. It's a decade old. So I hope that helps for those that literally store oil for later use. Just be careful where you store it. And again, work on the typical 3-year shelf life. I have one last thing I want to share with all of you. Now, my youngest sister is a school teacher, and in her classroom hangs a poster titled 212, The Extra Degree. And for those of you that have never seen that, it simply reads that at 211 degrees, water is hot. At 212 degrees, water boils. And with boiling water comes steam. And with steam, ladies and gentlemen, you can power a train. And the simple message to take from that is how 1 extra degree can make all the difference. Penn Grade 1 high performance oil, without me sounding like a salesman, I'm not a salesman, I'm a tech guy, but without sounding like a salesman, Penn Grade 1 gives you that extra degree. It is the absolute best engine oil lubricant for your classic Corvair. Unparalleled protection. Okay? So with that, I want to say thank you so very much for your time and inviting me into your homes this evening. I hope that you do want to continue, maybe do a part 2 someday. I just want you to know that I'm more than willing to do that. Jeanette, thank you so much for having me. I hope this was what you wanted. I hope I was able to help some of your members. And again, I'm just a phone call and an email away.
Thank you so much, Ken. And I just want to share with the folks that are on the call, when Ken volunteered to do this and I told him he had an hour, he was like, oh my gosh, I usually do this in 2.5 hours. So he did a great job in condensing and respecting everybody's time, given that I know we have East Coast people. I also want to share that this presentation is recorded. It will go out on the Corvair Society of America YouTube channel that you can search for and look for. We just had one more question come in that I'll bring up. And if anybody else has any other questions, you're welcome to put them on chat and Ken will stay on. Before you leave the chat, I just want to let you know we will have a meetup next month in May, 3rd Thursday. And it's going to be fun. It's going to be live from the new Corvair Museum in Springfield. So you guys will get to have a tour of the museum by our museum folks down in Springfield. We're going to do it live. Real quick, a good question. Where is pen grade sold? Ken?
Okay, what I would suggest, yes, this is where I would usually defer to my colleague, Nick Dixon. You know, just an interesting point. Nick Dixon is, I've often been called the face of Pen Grade 1. My good colleague and friend, Nick Dixon, is literally the heart of Pen Grade 1. So this is where I would typically defer to him. But if your members were to visit pengrade1.com, pengrade1.com, we have a store locator or where to buy. If you simply click that hyperlink, we have a, just put in your zip code, and everybody within a 25, 50 mile, 100 mile radius that deals or sells Pen Grade 1 in your area will pop up. And what's nice about that is you can call ahead. You can do some shopping. It's a very simple process. The other means is to order online through Jegs, Summit, or Amazon. Now, if you want to call me and say, hey, Ken, I'm interested in ordering a case of straight 30 weight or a case of 20W50, what is the part number for that? If you have the part number, it's a very easy process for those that want to have the oil sent directly to your home, okay? But obviously, I would prefer you visit our dealers, distributors. They're all over the country, ladies and gentlemen. Just visit pengrade1.com. Use your zip code and they'll all pop up for you, or you can always call me. So.
Okay, and I do have one more question that folks were asking to make sure gets asked. Can you tell us the difference between your high performance SAE 30 and your SAE 30 racing oil?
Oh, what a great question. Okay.
Yay. Thank you, Donald.
Now listen, you said high performance 30.
He said between your high performance SAE 30 and your SAE 30 quote unquote racing oil.
They are exactly the same product. And what he's referring to is, for many years, the racing oil, what you would find on that quartz, the verbiage indicating racing oil, it was just older stock. It was older label stock. When the labels were redone to its current form, you know, the racing name just simply disappeared. Okay, it's under that new picture now. If you can see on the screen, there's no reference other than Pen Grade. Okay, I'm sure there's reference of racing oil or high performance elsewhere on that label, but there is absolutely no difference. And you know, back in let's say 2016, 2017, we're still fumbling through the acquisition. I was literally in dealers and distributors where we had, you know, the racing oil sitting next to the brand new bottle. So you can imagine the concern, the confusion that created for our loyal end users. So that's a great question, but to answer it, they are one and the same product. And the other way you can confirm the product that you have is via the part number that's listed just above the barcode on the back of the label.
Thank you. And thanks to the folks that are asking questions in the chat. I think we'll wrap up. And again, thank you so much, Ken, for coming again. Some of you may remember that Ken made this presentation, or I should say the presentation, at the Pittsburgh convention. And that's where some folks said, wow, there's so much to know about oil and so much to learn. So if you want to have them come back for another meetup, we can do that and do a part 2 and learn even more. But I hope this gave everybody a little bit of a flavor of how much there is to learn here. So with that, I think we're going to call it an evening. And again, thank you so much, Ken, for your, oh, I'm already getting messages saying, let's do a part 2. So there you go. So
Wonderful.
We'll have them come back. That's great. Thank you, guys. Thank you, everybody, for coming and enjoying our meetup. This is part of the privileges of being a member of Corsa, and we hope you enjoy them, and you're going to be getting a survey. I do it every meeting. I love getting your feedback, and the board loves seeing what kind of presentations you like. We're trying to get more technical. This is kind of technical feel here, but next month we're going to have some fun at the museum, a night at the museum. Good night, everybody, and have a great rest of the week. Bye.
Good night. Thank you.
Good night. Thank you, Ken.